I'm John Wilson, I'm the CEO at Agenta. We're a technology company that focuses on education and learning. We build, manage and operate platforms for education, for video collaboration. Externally, we prefer to work with what we feel as ethical industries. Obviously education, teaching, learning, healthcare. We feel that we can really contribute to these industries by creating exciting platforms, easy to use platforms, secure platforms that people can utilise. What we feel is one of the most important things for Scotland to boost economic growth is investing in rural areas. By investing in broadband in these local areas, we can attract more talent, we can attract more companies, and we can drastically improve the delivery of education and learning within these schools within disparate regions within Scotland.
Like an on-time session is a good session. My name's Peter Bryant. I am the chair for this session. I'm currently the Associate Dean of Education at the University of Sydney Business School, which you might pick from the accent. But for those of you who've seen me around here for many years, I've worked in a number of UK universities before moving over there. We've got 3 papers to be presented in this session. They'll get 20 minutes each, so there'll be an opportunity to ask each of them questions at the end of their papers, and of course you can do it through both the completely non-traditional way of putting your hand up and asking a question with a microphone, or you can use the very traditional analog Me Too system, which is up there on the big screens, and the presenters can go with that. So without further ado, we shall introduce our first paper, and it is actually my great pleasure to introduce Leo Haberman, who is now at UCL. My brain automatically would just go, but no, it's an UCL now. Presenting a paper to you today, and I was going to look up at the screen, but I'll have to read it off this because I am a person who can't read without my glasses up. From under the radar to under review, digital learning in a face-to-face university in quotation marks. Over to you now.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to 2 of my co-authors for also being here, who will help me answer the questions, but I'm just going to sort of rattle it off. This really is a story of what I've been up to quite recently in the last few months of my previous role at Birkbeck, and in a way also the story of what I've been up to the whole time over the last 10 years that I've been working at Birkbeck. It could only really be down to me to present this, I suppose. So it's a story of a review of technology-enhanced learning that we did in the college, and it's still a bit of an unfinished tale, I must warn you, and a bit of a trip down memory lane. It began with an institution-wide student experience review and various findings were pointing to the need to increase support for digital approaches to learning and teaching. And to make a long story short enough, this resulted in doing a TEL review to look into what we are doing, what other institutions are doing, what we think we should be doing. And so, as in so many of these kinds of stories, the context is king. I should tell you a bit about the context of the institution, which is Birkbeck, University of London. So Birkbeck was actually established in 1823, then as the London Mechanics Institute, by somebody called Dr. George Birkbeck, so that was where the name actually came from, for the express purpose of enabling working people to study in the evening. Which was also known at the time, or referred to, as spreading the seeds of evil. And the same mission continues today. So really of enabling working people to study in the evening. And so really who are our students at Birkbeck? There is really no typical Birkbeck student. Overwhelmingly, for the most part, everyone is evening taught between 6 and 9 p.m. Studying across all levels from certificates of higher education through to doctorates, across many and varied disciplines. The majority traditionally have been part-time students who have entered via direct application to the college, but increasingly, and with an average age in their kind of mid-30s. But increasingly we've been seeing more people coming in through UCAS, the average age getting younger, more students actually studying full-time while still in the evening, so actually working, sometimes even working full-time and studying full-time. We have a lot of non-traditional students in the sense that they're mature working, it's their first degree, possibly first person in the family to go to university. Also higher than average rates of students from throughout the EU, students with disabilities and specific learning difficulties, and also higher than average numbers of taught postgraduates. So it's quite a mix, quite a lot of contrasts. So doing the TEL support in a small, or what I like to call a small to medium, face-to-face university of this kind of unusual and quite specific nature is quite a challenge. And we were doing this with quite a small team. So the TEL team in 2008, when I joined, before I joined, consisted of one learning technologist and one IT trainer. They were joined by one more learning technologist, which was me, in 08-09 to support the process of migrating from WebCT to Blackboard. The IT trainer role didn't get replaced when the person who was doing it left, but there was a decision at the time to start rolling out lecture capture, and so a post was created for the purpose of doing that. So it's been a pretty consistent size throughout that history. Considering that much has been achieved, so we had the migration to Blackboard, rapid growth in the number of modules that were using the VLE and using learning technologies, migration again to Moodle, a huge growth in online submission and marking, a lot of changes being made to the data integration and improvements to it, lecture capture, lynda.com, all of this kind of work that needs to go on to just kind of keep the platforms ticking over and keep services running and enable the possibility of doing some kind of technology enhanced learning was being done. And at the same time, even some surprising things managed to happen around the edges. So some work on developing blended, mostly online provision to support skills development, work on developing resources to support inclusive practices, accessibility of learning resources, and also some projects with the Bloomsbury Learning Environment, like the assessment and feedback project, which resulted in a book that Sarah and I co-edited on assessment, feedback, and technology. So some great practice was happening, but very much like when when there was kind of a little bit of extra time to do it because there was not a lot of capacity. And unfortunately, instead of seeing this as these were as being proofs of concept of the kind of great stuff that we could do, it seemed like this was kind of enough. So, I mean, was this just a case of don't ask, don't tell? I think what was going on here was that we had various Birkbeck, what I call tell myths in operation, which were sort of somewhat born from these ideas of Birkbeck exceptionalism, that as the college is so uniquely different, we simply don't need to do things in the way that other people do them. And so one of these key myths was we're not the Open University, so we're the wrong institution to do this kind of work. The academics don't want to do TEL, that was another key one, so we have the wrong staff for doing that kind of stuff, or our students are not digital natives, so in other words, we have the wrong students for doing that kind of stuff. So there were all these kind of things were sort of circulating and seemed to support the narrative that we didn't really need to. There wasn't much demand to go further with this. So it was only really when the student experience review came along and said there is actually need to look at this in more depth, that there was an opportunity to talk about how we were going to go beyond business as usual. And so what we decided to do with this review was to do an external strand, which would pull together some data from surveys like USISA and Health, some sector data that was out there, and also that we're going to reach out to contacts in other HEIs. And we had hoped at the time that we were proposing how to do this review to have longer than we were given. There was quite a long time waiting for whether we would have the green light to go ahead, and then when it came, it was like, yes, great, do it, and do it in 7 weeks. So that meant that we couldn't actually really do all the things that we might have wanted to do, and reaching out to contacts at other HEIs became quite a focused process of looking only at these 3. In fact, the initial thought that we had, I don't know if Julie's in here, was reach out to other HEIs, talk to Julie. Julie Vos, who's the head of educational technology at City, because she's also a researcher in how institutions support technology-enhanced learning as well. And it was Julie who recommended that we talk to Sussex, and that proved to be quite useful because it was more of a similar sized kind of institution to Birkbeck with a similar kind of problem of not having really had a lot of resourcing in this area, and that had built up a team over time and was now seeing a lot more success with it. So for the internal strand, we had intended to do more things than we managed to do. So we wanted interviews with staff, surveys of staff and students, user testing of staff and students, focus groups, and usage data. But we cut some of those things and stuck to what we thought we could get done in the time available. Also, user testing actually proved to be quite complicated to work out exactly what were we going to test, and we think that would be something that would need some more thought further down the line. So in terms of the external strand, immediately it was clear, and these, for those of us in this kind of alt community, I don't think this is going to be all that surprising, or a lot of our findings are not that surprising, but it kind of needed to come out through an official process. So we found that we were already using the most sort of standard or most popular platforms. So it was unlikely that there was a fundamental kind of technology lack that we needed to fill with some kind of other tool, or that would be a fix to the issues. And also, USISA surveys point out that the availability of TEL support staff is the largest driver of adoption of learning technologies, which is not that surprising, but still some people apparently find it surprising. In terms of speaking to people at other institutions, our external strand wanted to ask questions about their TEL vision, strategy and policy, their governance, how they do development and innovation, what kind of team structure and roles they have, and also anything, that we hadn't thought to ask, but that they regarded as, the good, the bad, and the ugly, things that are just simply, that they need to change or that are on the horizon. Or just really great that we had not elucidated. And so what sort of things did we find out? Sorry, these findings slides are a little bit text heavy. I need some water if I'm going to continue. So a really key finding here was that across the sector, face-to-face teaching is actually a bit of a misnomer in the sense that you might have face-to-face classes, but that teaching is generally regarded as blended for the most part now. There's always some kind of use of technologies, tools, platforms, and services that are involved in sort of campus-based, classroom-based teaching kind of mode. And that this understanding is now really forming part of institutional strategy and key processes. And so it's feeding into things like quality assurance and assessment policy and that kind of thing. Education technology is a fast-moving field as well, where things need to be reviewed and updated. And institutions often have a governance structure which oversees the links between the TEL strategy and its implementation. Something that we lack. A key overall finding, of course, there is no magic formula. Otherwise, we probably all would know it by now. Everywhere is kind of different, and the structures have evolved organically and responded to the local priorities. But there is a tendency to separate staff from student support, to separate pedagogic and technical support, and have dedicated support for distance learning, all of which we felt were worthwhile lessons for Birkbeck. So those were useful findings. In terms of the internal strand, we found learning technologies are being used across all the departments. The top 20 most visited Moodle modules were spread across 9. Students appreciate having online resources and study materials. They love when you use video, but high production values are not really required. Very consistent with other findings, but this is what the voice of our students. They said we want the content that's relevant, timely, and authentic. And staff, actually did not agree with the myths, fundamentally. They said we need a culture shift, we need strategy and governance of this that feeds directly into policy and investment decisions. Most staff were okay with the idea of standardization, having some kind of baseline or templates or evidenced guidance that then would be implemented locally in line with their needs. They noted the lack of support in making small, modest improvements is a significant brake on considering innovations. And staff and students regard our face-to-face mode learning and teaching as in fact blended to varying degrees of intensity. So very much we are actually pretty much normal compared with what's going on around the sector, and not an exceptional land of nothing digital after all. And the main recommendations emerging, and there were various sub-points here, but just the headlines are that we would need to develop a digital education strategy, establish a governance structure, build a digital education service, and then there'll be a few other key actions. So what's the result? Well, obviously I'd hoped when doing the abstract to have a very much more finalized kind of result to report. But as we know, institutional wheels sometimes are slower to turn than we had hoped. Also, there was a financial situation because the college has been hit by the sector-wide slump in part-time study. And while we are seeing conversion of students into full-time students, there is still a bit of a financial squeeze. And so we feel that our review was very well reviewed and has done significant work to dispel some of the tell myths and indicated a way forward for digital education at Birkbeck. But in this context of resource scarcity, will those at the helm wonder if they can afford to invest? On the other hand, can they afford not to? And that's it, thank you.
Thank you, Leo, and perfect timing, right on the 15-minute mark.
I practiced it so many times.
Firstly, I'll ask, is there any questions in the room with their hands up? Questions? Well, there is a question there for you to go on the Me Too.
There is a question there, and it's kind of what I was talking about in the final point. I mean, I think it has moved things forward in the institution. Sorry, maybe I should repeat the question. I'm not sure if that's necessary. Has producing this data helped to move things forward within the institution and gain support for senior management? So yes, I mean, I think to some degree, yes. I felt that when we presented the findings that people felt that they were very reasonable and very logical. There wasn't really a lot of resistance to it. On the other hand, to actually gain implementation of the recommendations is another whole kind of layer of kind of arguing over resources and priorities, and that's something that no, I'm not going to be there to be doing, but do you have any thoughts on that part? Elizabeth, one of the co-presenters.
One of the people who were on both of the strands. The wheels do turn very slowly, but I'm certainly, having sort of been right at the beginning, will continue to push for this. So I am already drafting my next email to the Master of the College on a follow-up, because he's the one who gave me the go-ahead to set up the steering committees in the first place. So I shall follow on and say what a wonderful experience it was and where we're going with it. So I will be pushing on that. That's going to happen.
Cool. Are there any other questions in the room with the roving mic running around? Any? Well, I'll ask one, if that's okay with you.
Please.
So what I found really interesting is the notion of how you explored blended. Because one of the sort of critical problems you often have in these sort of circumstances is this kind of dichotomous thing. Well, you want me to do technology, then I'm going to have to not teach, I'm going to be replaced by robots and all the kind of stuff. How did you sort of contextualise that spectrum of blended?
Well, so this was very, in the way that I've talked about it now, was very kind of summarised from a lot of actual kind of more granular feedback from focus groups and interviews with staff and that kind of thing. But what we found was that nobody thought that technology isn't in use already. And that they actually highlight the fact that they're using it in the classroom as well. So even in the face-to-face moment, they're projecting. They might be showing video or trying to play audio, and they did mention that sometimes these experiences are not totally reliable, and then this makes you wonder if you should try other things. And that, so it's. There was really a strong feeling that that blendedness is actually quite normal, but the sort of extent of it is really a continuum, and that it wasn't really something that we asked people to reflect on that much, so much as just more sort of what are you actually doing? Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, we've got one final question here.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Leo and Elizabeth and all. I know that open education is practical and research interest of yours, Leo, so I'm just wondering over the course of those interviews if open practices emerged as part of your discussion around talent and working beyond BLE, and how that might emerge, if so.
The open practices have emerged now and then, much more actually in kind of over time that I've been there talking to different people about the kind of stuff that they do. Very much I find that they are reflected in things like when the college gives awards for teaching. It's very much in relation to some kind of digital and open practice that they're engaged in. But one of the curious things that I find about Birkbeck as an organisation is that it doesn't generally address the idea of openness very kind of directly. And so as you know, as I mentioned, one of the kind of core tell myths was this one about we're not the open university, and I think that this is quite ironic because in fact we were the institution most similar to the open university, but simply doing it through kind of a different kind of mode. But actually they're entirely for the same kind of reasons and with the same type of profile of students. And so that's quite fascinating to me how the people who are doing open practices, unless I've already been kind of on their case about, do you know about all of this, wouldn't necessarily call it that.
Cool. Well, I'd like everyone to thank Leo and Elizabeth and Sarah and all the rest of the presenters for that paper.
Thanks.
And we will now move on to our next paper in the run as he lifts the glasses in the old man fashion. And we've got Andrew Lee who's presenting, and while he sets up, just remind people if they have come in a bit late, we have got the Me Too running. All the details to add to the session are on your table, and as you saw, the questions can go up there and the presenters can see them as they come up, and they can answer your questions if you don't feel like grabbing a microphone. So, our second paper, as I said, is from Andrew Lee, and the paper is entitled Upscaling Learning Technology, the Evolution of E-Learning in a University Hospital Emergency Department. So I will...
Okay, I need a USB port.
There's one there. I think that's about the only one. Talk amongst yourselves.
It's not recognising the drive. It's not coming up.
We've got one of our technical people that might be able to help. Thank you, Mark.
Do you want to just plug your drive in here? So this is your
Yeah,
passport.
yeah, Okay. Conferences, presentation. Our conference at the top. Presentation. That's it. Upscaling. Okay. Cheers, thanks a lot. Sorry. Sorry for the delay, everybody. My name's Andrew Lee, and I'm presenting today from Nottingham, from the University of Nottingham, and I'm talking about a collaborative project between the University of Nottingham, the School of Health Sciences, and the Nottingham University Hospital, Queen's Medical Centre. The project in question is the development of a website that I've been working on. And today I'm specifically talking about the educational component in that website, with a view to how that's evolved and the e-learning that's been involved. The first question really is, what is the DREEAM department? The DREEAM department is the department that the website is being built for. And DREEAM stands for the Department of Research and Education in Emergency Medicine, Acute Medicine, and Major Trauma. It's serving about 400 people in the ED department and educating them. And its ethos is that it combines the education and the research that it conducts into clinical practice, and it advances patient care based on that. The department has several functions, two major departments, education and research. The education has internal components, the 400 or so people within ED and other members of Nottingham University Hospital Trust. It also runs external courses where people external to the trust can come in and receive education in DREAM. It has a simulation function. Members of the public can become simulated patients, take part in scenarios and various workshops. And it has a big resource area, ECG banks, radiology banks, podcasts, and many others. Most of the education in DREAM is conducted in a classroom environment. Traditional classroom teaching, but a multitude of other types of workshops, scenarios and simulations that I've already alluded to. And that's great. Classroom teaching is ideal for an awful lot of what they do. It's fun, it's engaging, and it's flexible. There are, however, limitations with classroom education. You can't, in terms of numbers, you can't, there's a limited number of people that you can teach. There's a problem with the flexibility of space. If you want to teach 3 people, you're using the space that might be designed for 30 or 40 people. Classroom teaching traditionally is time-consuming. It takes a lot of effort to create the materials. Teaching can't be saved. And there's a specific issue in emergency departments of coordination. So, for example, you may arrange for a classroom event, and then there's a major accident. Members of the public can present with medical issues that require the person that you've engaged in teaching. Obviously, the public always takes priority, and so coordinating education is very difficult. These issues with classrooms are the issues of DREAM, the challenges of DREAM when it needs to upscale. It needs to teach more people. It needs to find an answer to the problem of the inflexibility of space. It needs to have much more direct education with the learner, so that it's faster and it's more responsive. There needs to be much higher productivity, so that education can be recorded and saved, and then learners can see the recordings. And they need an answer to the coordination problem, so that the teaching that they're providing fits in with their lives and the work styles of the people that they're there to serve. There are 2 other very big issues involved with medical education, one of which is interprofessionalism. And for those of you not familiar with this term, it's about clinicians not being fully aware or not being fully confident to comment on the behaviour of other clinicians. It's attempting to deal with an issue termed siloing. Nurses, when they go to university to learn to be a nurse, are taught wholly with nurses. Doctors are taught wholly with doctors. When these clinicians are thrown together, they need to work together and understand one another in the ED department. And so that's an added challenge that DREAM needs to confront. There's also the speed of change of medical research, which is happening at an alarming rate. It's reached the point now where doctors and nurses, when they begin their career in ED, their base knowledge is already out of date, and their education really begins on the first day, and they need to be re-educated from the get-go. There have been 3 previous websites where DREAM has attempted to answer these various problems. They've fundamentally been passive websites, and obviously websites answer the problem of teaching in terms of numbers of people, because they reach everybody, and they answer the problem of inflexible space because of their own flexibility, so you can educate whatever numbers you want. The biggest drawback with this type of website is that it requires developer input, and that's time consuming, and that's always been a problem. Faced with those challenges and the desire to upscale, at this point DREAM approached the School of Health Sciences at the university, and specifically a department called HELM, which is the Health and E-Learning and Media team in the School of Health Sciences. It's a specialist department providing learning materials, resources and objects for the School of Health Sciences, and the people who work there are specialists in web development, multimedia, audio, video, and those things. And then it was at that point I was seconded to the DREEAM department in the role of project manager and developer. And at this point I can just quickly be able to show you the website. Nope. That's not what I want to do. Okay. This is a DREEAM website and it's a work in progress. At the moment we are adding modules to it. It's a Drupal website. I'll explain what that means in a moment. So we're adding modules to it. We're also theming it. We're also mentoring the members of the DREAM department so that they can use it. But I just thought I would just give you a little bit of a, this is the team, or part of the team. This is the beginnings of the educational components, the course components. Current research projects, archive research projects, information about simulation, radiology banks. Okay, and its address is dream.ac.uk, so it's an accredited site. Okay, now it's a Drupal site. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with content management systems, Drupal is one of the big three content management systems, along with WordPress and Magento. It's free to use, it's open source, and it's very similar to other VLEs like Moodle, Blackboard, in the sense that it's modular and you can add whatever functionality you need to. To improve the upscaling problem, I decided on multiple content authors, which is an important aspect of the website. There's a vast array of different roles in clinicians, and they need to be taught by clinicians similarly spread out. So nurses taught by nurses, doctors obviously taught by doctors, but the other array of roles taught specifically by people with those roles in the education department. Upscaling is aided by the modular aspect of the site, so that it's responsive. As you need to add new features, it's very easy to do. An example of one of those modules is paragraphs, which adds greatly to the functionality and the editing capabilities of the site, so content authors can create the kind of pages that they want to create. Something familiar to everybody who's used Moodle is the idea of books. These are organised series of lessons, self-contained learning objects with contents pages, index pages, and our books now is a part of Drupal 8. So in terms of upscaling, it allows learners to access via a library their learning easily. One other important feature of this new site is that the content authors will become developers. And that means that they'll be able to actually create the architecture and the design of the site, and not just to create the learning resources. That's important in terms of ownership. If they feel that it's theirs, then they'll be much more motivated to work with it. Finally, I would just like to mention the changing roles now between developer and user. In this context, Helm has become more of a consultant providing pedagogical know-how, maintenance of the site, help with technical issues that are particularly technical. But the members of the DREEAM department now have taken on much more of a role of developer. So they're able to upscale the site and the site's architecture in the way that they want to. To summarise, the upscaling of the educational component of this website is alleviated in terms of accessing numbers and flexibility of space purely by being an interactive website. All websites answer those issues. There's wide departmental content authorship, which gives direct connection between the teacher and learner. So there's no recourse for developers to be involved in that process. Modules aid upscaling through the wide variety of functionality and access to resources that they offer. And finally, content authors now have much greater ownership of the website because it's been specifically engineered so that they can design the architecture of the website as well as add content. In closing, I think my final remarks would really be to consider Drupal as a virtual learning environment in the same sense that you might consider Moodle, particularly if you need to design a website for a department such as DREEAM that has all other components, but the educational component is very good and is getting a lot better. Moodle, for instance, was fully integrated into Drupal 7, and I know that's planned with Drupal 8. That concludes my lecture about the evolution of e-learning in the DREEAM department. And I'd like to thank you for your time, and I have a few minutes for questions.
Yep, so we've got one question on the Me Too. You can see it on the iPad there.
Very stable. We have uptime of 99.8%. The site is hosted with a company called UK Fast. It's an excellent company, and that's their uptime. It's at that point. It's at that level.
Is there any question in the room? Yep.
Hi, thanks May for the presentation. I just have a question and it follows on from Amber's talk this morning where she talked about the business case as learning developers. I'm just wondering what's in it for the university. This is not a fee paying or they're not getting students into particular programs. So I'm just wondering, you know, this kind of request, is it a project, a specialist project, or will you or how is managed? Because this is something that's happening increasingly where I work in health sciences. Our stakeholders are asking us to get involved in these types of projects. So just wondering if you can give some background to that.
There is money involved. The external course component of DREEAM means that there's a revenue stream that way, so that external students have to pay to come to DREEAM. And there are other revenue streams with DREEAM. In terms of the School of Health Sciences, this is it's a great learning vehicle for them. This is quite entirely new. It also gives a tremendous platform for a lot of the resources that are being created, for example, by Helm. And it's an opportunity for a great deal of improved collaboration between DREEAM and between Helm and the school. So, I mean, there's a lot in it really for both parties.
Excellent. All right. We will need to keep to time, so thank you, Andrew. If we could have a note of appreciation for Andrew. Right, we're on to our final presentation, and we have from Queen Mary, Maria Toro-Troconis, and she is going to be doing her presentation on Does Learning Design Have an Effect on Student Performance? Aligning Learning Design with Learning Analytics. And without further ado, over to Maria.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I'm wearing my coat, but I've been really cold yesterday and today. I'm not hiding anything underneath, it's just that I'm a bit cold, so apologies for that. This presentation, I gave similar presentation at the M25 meeting, and some of you were there, so apology for that. I'm going to emphasize the learning design more, so you're going to have a look at the framework in more detail, so you know, and you don't leave the room now. So I'm Maria Toro-Troconis. I actually work at Cambridge Education Group Digital, and my colleague Anthony Alexiv, he's not here today, unfortunately, but he's from Queen Mary University. We at CEG Digital, we partner with different universities to develop online programs, fully online programs, and these are some of our partners. And that's why I'm presenting this paper with Queen Mary today, because they are one of our partners. We tend to create also research collaborations with different people within those institutions. But today, really, when we think, there are two themes to this paper, learning analytics as well as learning design. And I really want to emphasize the learning design aspect of that, because as we've been hearing today and yesterday, the context of learning analytics is really important. And I think if we emphasize where we are coming from the learning design point of view, we will be able to understand better where we are going with the learning analytics. So that's why today I'm going to go deeper into the learning design framework that we work on. So the learning design framework that we are following is based on the co-design framework that we developed at Liverpool University. This framework is open source. I'll give you a website later, but it's being designed for CEG Digital, and that's what we are using now with the partners. The co-design framework feeds from the blended learning design framework that we developed at Imperial College. This is a few years ago now. At the time, we partnered with City University, with UCL and King's College, and we pilot the use of the tool. But I want to tell you today what we are taking from that framework into the new co-design framework. And it's basically, as you can see there on the right-hand side, when we designed the framework, we were thinking about how do we do blended learning? How do we know what activities lend themselves to self-directed learning and what activities lend themselves to collaborative learning? And that was a big question at the time. So as you can see on the right-hand side, that graph is showing when we mapped the learning outcomes, we can see where you fit within the graph. So you see the x-axis is showing you the instructionist approach, the self-directed approach, and the y-axis is showing the collaborative approach. So you can see where the blend goes. And the self-directed learning can be face-to-face, it can be online, it can be a mix. The key components are self-directed, something that you do on your own, in any kind of mode, and the collaborative aspect can be also face-to-face or online. So, but the key really for us to identify that blend was the use of learning outcomes, because at the end of the day you need to know what you want your learners to be able to do in your activities. So that's why we use Bloom's taxonomy. So basically, at the end of the research, what we established was activities that lend themselves to self-directed learning. For example, in the psychomotor domain, to develop skills, you need a mix of both. You can't rely medical surgeons to be doing just online learning and then being able to operate and perform in the theatre. The cognitive domain, if you are within the low end of the cognitive domain, you can use self-directed learning. So if you need factual information, procedural information, you can use self-directed learning. But if you move up the level in the cognitive domain, if you look at conceptual and metacognitive, you need to have collaboration. You need to give space to students to verbalize what they are learning and being able to explain what they are constructing. And the affective domain, again, changing people's behaviors and attitudes. We can't just rely on a self-directed learning, self-directed module to be able to do that. Sometimes you can see that in the corporate sector, for example, with changing people's attitude to diversity, and you just sit down and click, 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 and then you've done that, and you've changed your perception of diversity and health and safety. So that's why we say the affective domain, we need to have a collaborative activity. So this is what we're taking from the blended learning framework, and it's basically how we accommodate the driver for the learning design depending on where you are within the cognitive and the affective and the psychomotor. And also within the co-design framework, we are using two frameworks, which is the LAILAT framework, the learning types. And you can see that, for example, acquisition, one of the learning types is when you're reading or you're consuming some content, listening to a podcast, watching a video clip. Discussion, when you are obviously discussing with your peers, with your tutor. Practice, when you're putting into practice what you're learning. Production, when you are producing something tangible, probably a digital artifact or something in a tutorial or something like that. Inquiry, when you're looking for information, where you might be searching on the internet, looking information in the library. And here, there is another learning type that we don't mention there, which is the collaboration, because we embed that in the production side of things. That's why it's not listed there. The other framework that we use is basically, so we say, okay, we know that coming from Bloom taxonomy, we know where we are. My learning outcome is telling me that my learners need to be able to explain something, and that means conceptual level within the cognitive domain. Now, I'm going to use a mix of things. I'm going to use a bit of acquisition, a bit of discussion. I want them to practice, and so on. But how much of that do I put together? That's why we are using the 70-20-10. So basically, the 70-20-10 is telling us a little bit about how we can balance the learning activity. Now that we know where we are coming from, what we are trying to achieve from a learning outcome point of view, we know what kind of types of learning we can use within that to deliver that learning outcome. How much of that can we put together? So we use the 70-20-10. It's not set on stone. It's something just to guide us on how we see the week. So if we are designing a week, how the balance is going. And this is something that Leonard is there. He created these 6 steps at the beginning of the company, where we have, at the beginning of every week, so if we are developing a 30-credit module, we have 12 weeks. Every week we'll have these boxes, these sections. And the first section is basically the introduction of the topic, and we call it hook and discussion. That's when we link practice with the topic to engage the learners. Guided practice is more the lecture material. Challenge activity, something to produce, something to practice on. Reflection and webinar. The webinar is a face-to-face, well, it's an online live activity with a tutor. So you can see if we go back to the 70-20-10, the 10%, the acquisition, is mainly going on number 2, on guided practice, although it might go somewhere else, if there is a reading in the challenge activity and so on. So the 20 and the 70 are spread around the other sections. But that's helping us. So if we are designing that week, we can see, wow, that week has, the 10% has gone up to 50. And if we apply this probably to our traditional delivery in higher education at the moment, we can see probably the 10% very, very high. And I think that's the challenge for us, to really challenge that approach and introduce more collaborative learning. But this is basically how we balance the learning activities. So this is the framework, and all of these frameworks are basically included in the co-design framework. And this is how we are basically navigating the learning design aspect of the project. So the cards, basically, these printed cards that we have and we share with academics. And you can see on the left-hand side, those are 6 phases that we have. And on the right-hand side is 2 piles of cards, 1 green and 1 blue. And I'm going to show you now the phases, the 6 phases on the left-hand side. So phase one, basically, when we sit down, we talk about the scope of the project. So if we are designing a module, we talk about the main learning outcomes, what they want to achieve. Are there any problems in terms of capabilities, digital skills, these kind of things in terms of the target users. Phase two is really key, and this is the one that links to the blended learning framework. And here is when we then go down to learning outcomes, and we need to specify what they need to be able to do. And then you have verbs in the blue and the green boxes, and that's how you identify the activities in the blue and the green cards. Activity descriptors, different things I'll show you later. I don't have much time now. Learning descriptors, the learning types, as well as it says it has to be updated, it's Advanced HE framework. Then you select all your learning activities, and then you analyze the learning applying the 70-20-10. So as you can see here, this is one of the cards, the blue cards. So that means that when you went through the phases, you've identified the verb within that box, and that means high-level cognitive domain, probably, or the affective domain. And this is an example. So we have different examples from different partners. In this case, this one is from Falmouth University, and it's for inquiring, producing, practicing, and discussing. And it's contextualizing what we are saying with the framework. You can see there the different components of the activities that I mentioned, the 70-20-10 with the learning type, so you know what you're targeting using that type of activity. You can see here that it's an online activity, individual and group work, and also you need a VLE to deliver that. And these are the advanced HE domains. So if you're applying for the fellowship, you know that how you map that activity, as a teacher in your practice. This is another example from Queen Mary, and also producing all the different components. But it's nearly over the presentation, but now it's going to the learning analytics. So having a systematic way of designing the courses is easier for us to actually think about how we're going to interrogate the data, how we're going to do learning analytics to help and to inform our learning design. And this is what we are doing with Queen Mary. So this is a very small project, a very small sample, only 22 students and 2 assignments on that module. We had over 4,000 entries that we analyzed. And we apply a logistic regression analysis. Our dependent variable was a pass mark over 60%. So we were looking at if there was any association between the participation in forums or the entries in the reflective portfolio, because that's happening every week, or there was any association with access to content pages with the overall pass mark or the overall performance in the course. And we were thinking that probably people that participated more were doing better, but we didn't find any significant difference in that area. Whereas we found a significant difference, the p-value is not too low, but it's still significant in the use of the clinical reflective journal. So we identified for a student having 6 entries in their critical reflective journal, the probability of passing the module with a mark over 60% is about 80%. Obviously, it depends on all the variables. This is just a very small analysis that we did. We need to look at a bigger sample, more data, and cross-check all the variables as well. But it's just interesting. I think it's just for us to see. I think my goal today is really to show you that for us to really do some learning analytics, we really need to contextualize what we are doing. We need to, in terms of learning design, if we are doing learning design systematically, without losing track of how pedagogically we are doing it, we can then think about how learning design can help us and help the learners to achieve their outcomes. And I think that's me. Thank you very much. That's my contact details and the website.
Thank you very much, Maria. There's no questions on the Me Too at the moment. Do we have any questions in the room? Anyone going to ask a question? Yep, over there.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I was really inspired by the last finding that reflective journals seemed to have this correlation to enhancing the grade. But of course, is there any way we could determine if those students were going to be more likely to succeed anyway, that their fact of doing reflections was related to the fact that they were already good students, and it was not the journals or their engagement with the online platform that made the difference. How can we disambiguate those findings?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, that's why we need to be doing a bigger analysis, and also we need to be careful about also the data that we are using in terms of demographics and things like that. But I think that's a really important point. I mean, we can't generalize with the findings that, you know, anybody that will be more active reflecting will, you know, pass the course with high pass mark. But that's why this is just the beginning of the research, and that's something that we are thinking about as well. Thank you.
Yep, a question just up there.
Thank you, Maria. Very interesting talk. I'm really interested in the way you have used the 70-20-10 model, because we are doing the same at the Royal Australasian College of Physicians. But of course, there is a bit of discussion about the fact that the 70-20-10 model is not really supported by evidence or data. So are you going to publish any research on the way in which you use the model to, you know, start collecting evidence about it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, what we want to see really is, I mean, when we are designing the courses, really, the 70-20-10 is never spot on. So we can see, for example, courses on law, the 10 becomes higher because of the nature of the course. So what we are really interested in is really to look at how the foundation of the 70-20 is there, but it's how the disciplines, how that variation is happening and why. And I think rather than just saying, yeah, the 70-20-10 works, I don't think we, in teaching and learning, we can really apply that formula to anything. I think that's just the foundation for us to give us guidance, and then to have a more constructive analysis of you know, the data that we can collate. But yeah, hopefully we will be publishing something along those lines. Thank you.
I note we are now pretty much just a little bit over time, and we've got a fairly tight bump out to the next session. So I'd like you to thank all three of our presenters, and also Maria, who hasn't had her own individual applause. So thank you for that. And off to the next session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maria.
I'm John Wilson, I'm the CEO at Agenta. We're a technology company that focuses on education and learning. We build, manage and operate platforms for education, for video collaboration. Externally, we prefer to work with what we feel as ethical industries. Obviously education, teaching, learning, healthcare. We feel that we can really contribute to these industries by creating exciting platforms easy to use platforms, secure platforms that people can utilise. What we feel is one of the most important things for Scotland to boost economic growth is investing in rural areas. By investing in broadband in these local areas, we can attract more talent, we can attract more companies, and we can drastically improve the delivery of education and learning within these schools within disparate regions within Scotland.